Sharon's fear did not arrive suddenly. It had been building for weeks, growing heavier with every careful glance and every unfinished thought. The secret she shared with Vernon was no longer contained by silence alone. It lived in the spaces between them, in the way her pulse spiked whenever Leslie's name surfaced, in the constant awareness that control was slipping through her fingers. What terrified Sharon most was not exposure itself, but timing. Anita's vulnerability made the truth exponentially more dangerous, transforming a buried mistake into a potential weapon capable of destroying what little stability remained. Vernon understood this instinctively. His anger burned with a colder intensity than Sharon's fear, shaped by years of power struggles and strategic survival. He knew Leslie's assurances were meaningless, not because she was incapable of loyalty, but because loyalty had never been her primary motivation. Information, to Leslie, was leverage. Secrets were currency. Vernon had built his life on managing risk, and Leslie represented the kind of variable he despised: unpredictable, emotionally driven, and immune to intimidation. The realization that she was already talking did not surprise him. It confirmed his worst instincts and sharpened his resolve. Leslie thrived in the shadows between truth and rumor. She understood precisely how much to reveal and to whom, fragmenting the secret into pieces small enough to deny, yet potent enough to spread unease. Each carefully placed hint allowed her to remain technically innocent while ensuring that suspicion took root. What she sought was not chaos for its own sake, but relevance. Being at the center of whispered conversations gave her a sense of power she had long craved. Silence to her was erasure, and she refused to be invisible any longer. As the secret leaked in distorted fragments, its impact rippled outward. Sharon felt the walls closing in, her internal conflict intensifying with every passing day. Part of her wanted to confront Leslie directly, to force a reckoning and reclaim control. Another part knew that confrontation would only accelerate the collapse. She was trapped between the urge to protect herself and the lingering desire to believe that restraint could still save her. The tension manifested as anger, at Leslie, at Vernon, and ultimately at herself for allowing the situation to spiral beyond her grasp. Vernon, meanwhile, wrestled with a different kind of fury.
His anger was rooted in betrayal, not just by Leslie, but by the circumstances that had placed him in this position at all. He had prided himself on foresight, on anticipating threats before they materialized. The fact that the secret had become a liability exposed a vulnerability he had long denied. His instinct was to neutralize the threat, yet every option carried consequences that could prove equally destructive. Silencing Leslie outright risked drawing attention. Discrediting her required sacrifices he was not prepared to make. Each potential solution demanded a moral compromise that chipped away at his self-image. As rumors circulated, Anita's presence loomed like an unspoken judgment. Her strength and resilience, once reassuring, now heightened the stakes. Sharon's guilt deepened as she imagined the fallout, the betrayal layered atop existing pain. The possibility that Anita might learn the truth indirectly, through whispers rather than honesty, felt unbearable. Yet Sharon's fear of confession outweighed her sense of responsibility. She justified her silence as protection, even as she recognized it as cowardice. Leslie's actions grew bolder as she sensed the tension tightening around her. The more she spoke, the more indispensable she felt, feeding off the reactions she provoked. She convinced herself that she was merely correcting narratives, ensuring that the truth would not be twisted against her. In reality, her motivations were far less noble. She wanted leverage, validation, and proof that she could not be ignored or controlled. The risk of being exposed herself only added to the thrill. The pressure pushed all three towards decisions they could no longer postpone. Sharon considered preemptive honesty, weighing the devastation it might cause against the possibility of regaining moral ground. Vernon contemplated containment strategies that would permanently alter alliances and trust. Leslie, intoxicated by her influence, edged closer to crossing a line from which there would be no return. Each was driven by fear masquerading as determination, anger disguised as righteousness. As the secret continued to mutate in the hands of others, its original truth became increasingly irrelevant. What mattered was perception. Suspicion took on a life of its own, eroding relationships and hardening hearts. Sharon felt isolated, convinced that every look carried judgment. Vernon grew more calculating, retreating into control as a defense against exposure.
Leslie reveled in the chaos.
unaware or unwilling to accept that she was accelerating her own downfall. The inevitability of confrontation hung over them like a storm. None of them could predict how or when the truth would surface, only that it would. Each choice they made narrowed their options, forcing them closer to the edge. In their attempts to protect themselves, they had created a situation where damage was no longer hypothetical, but guaranteed. What truly bound them together was not the secret itself, but the fear of what it revealed about who they had become. Their anger, their betrayals, and their calculated silences had transformed a single hidden truth into a catalyst for destruction. And as the walls closed in, it became clear that the real question was no longer what Leslie had told others, but how much of themselves Sharon and Vernon were willing to sacrifice to keep the rest of the truth buried. As the tension reaches its breaking point, the truth no longer feels like a single secret waiting to be exposed, but a living force pressing in from all sides. Sharon stands at the edge of a choice that will define her future, knowing that silence has already cost her more than honesty ever could. Vernon, hardened by years of control, begins to realize that power cannot undo emotional damage, and that every calculated move has only tightened the trap around them. Leslie, emboldened by chaos of her own making, senses that her influence is peaking even as the ground beneath her starts to crumble. What began as fear has evolved into inevitability, and inevitability demands consequence. No one remains untouched, loyalties fracture, motives are laid bare, and the illusion of control dissolves completely. As the final pieces fall into place, one truth becomes unavoidable. Some secrets do not destroy because they are revealed, but because they are carried for too long. And when the reckoning finally arrives, it will not ask who is ready, only who is left standing.